Hello everyone and welcome to our presentation. The interesting topic we will be introducing is religious developments of the 19th century in United States. Well, before talking directly about these religious developments, we need first to mention and understand the historical background, starting with defining religion. So when we say religion, we say beliefs, religious thoughts, and very specific practices related to God and divine. It is a relationship with ultimate concern about life and fate, and for some people it's even a mode of life where they worship and devote themselves to God and His power. This is the general definition agreed upon by most of people. However, religion is more than that. Religion is not only some sets of beliefs, but in fact it's a system, a social and cultural system that organizes and guides the community, and this what form small communities into larger ones. Throughout time, these communities will move and immigrate, and this will definitely have an impact on other societies and communities. The United States were experiencing a period of rapid industrialization and growth, which was the main reason for immigration. So even British immigrants escaped their country looking for economic opportunities and due to political and religious persecution. There was another reason for their immigration, which is the desire for adventure and exploration. British immigrants were skilled workers as mechanists, engineers, and many others. They were in high demand. So they found jobs easily in factories, in expanding factories actually. And their idea was for better living standards. Politically, nonconformists, Protestants such as Methodists, were struggling. They were subject to legal penalties and social ostracism. The Germans were the second largest group of immigrants during the 19th century. They came to the United States seeking economic opportunities and religious freedom. They settled in Midwest and became farmers or small business owners. Between 1820 and 1830, about 4.5 million Irish immigrated to United States, where also the United States received about 5 million German immigrants. Italians, on the other hand, added to the number during the post-Civil War years, also seeking for economic opportunities and escaping poverty and political turmoil. Finally, as we can see that many of the European countries, if not all of them, have decided to move into United States because one common reason, which was the religious execution, as it is remarkable that these people had no religious freedom in their own countries besides of the economic reasons. Looking for better life and better conditions, United States was the best destination at the time where religious, economic, and political freedom were found.
So from now on, we'll be discussing the religious identity of America, as well as the religious shift and alter Americans underwent during the 1800s, which actually stands for an epoch of tremendous and colossal advancement. As it was mentioned in the beginning by my classmate, multifarious religions happen to coexist within the American land. It goes from the Jews to the Catholics, and the list goes on, simply by virtue of the numerous happenings and circumstances. One which stands the most would probably be the immigration of minorities for a religious asylum. And putting that aside, we need to bear in mind that the religion aspect plays a salient role in someone's personal identity, and that does not exclude, in this case, the American at all. Actually, in this context, religion was a paramount constituent here in the shaping of their personal and national identity. Well, during this era of the 19th century, the majority of Americans were Protestant, and by Americans here we would include the Germans, the French, the British, which basically symbolized a sense of union American had at the time, owing to the common religion, regardless of the existent multiculturalism. Well, by now we established that Protestantism was pretty rampant in America, along with other branches of Christianity and to some extent other religions, since we had different colonies with diverse religion background, and each colony did establish its local church, which was correlated with local government of that specific colony. And this happened to carry on for some of them until the middle of 19th century, where from this point on we will witness a principle of separation from between the government and the institution of church, which we consider as a legacy of both the American Revolution as well as the Enlightenment ideals of reason along with freedom, including that of faith and worship. As far as religious reform is concerned, America was not foreign to it with the happening of the First Great Awakening and such. In fact, it kept evolving during the early 1800s, and the movement of successful Protestant revivals seeking salvation was brought to light. First in Tennessee, then it shifted to a more conservative phase in New England. Lastly, it reached New York and eventually Britain and other American states, which we do now associate it with the Second Great Awakening. So this latter revamped the American landscape, particularly the northern in distinct spheres, and set the stage to the antebellum period. A hectic era spent from the end of the 1812 war until the Civil War in the 60s. It was characterized by having those numerous radical philanthropic reforms led by the reform spirit. For instance, we have the abolition reform, the temperance movement. Simultaneously, it functioned as a stressor for the social and national aspect as well, with the polarity existing between the South and the North. And it is worth mentioning that, unlike the First Great Awakening, the second wave put emphasis on universal redemption, tolerance, morals, and free will. And it was pretty forbearing for the North, espousing African Americans and distinct denomination of this branch of Christianity, which is Protestantism. However, ironically, it generated antagonism toward Catholics, for it was perceived as incompatible with the American ideals of democracy, and even rejected the Calvinist notion of predestination. So the Second Great Awakening basically consisted of having both small and big camp meetings across the nation, lasting for days, in order to awaken people's faith through intense experience involving passionate preaching to bring back the Christian vehemence, moral order, and to convert as many peers as possible to the Protestant branch, as was the case in Kentucky, where the audience seemed to respond enthusiastically by jumping and fainting even. Well, we need to pay regard that the preaching in those mass conventions was a big factor in those responses. Sure, it was pretty plain and simple language, yet sentimentalized to an extent, and concerned with the appeal to the supernatural and intense emotions, where preachers were pretty much stereotyped, glamorizing the principle of Christianity to their congregation. Putting that aside, in respect to the impetus behind the emergence of this particular phenomenon, there is quite few speculations. In fact, some historians do claim it was the result of moral decay American soil was going through during the 1800s. In addition to that, we have the prevalence of rationalism as well as the rationalized theology, deism, which was pretty common within the circle of the founding fathers. Namely, we have Madison, Monroe, and Franklin. Without forgetting the negative repercussions and moral degeneracy of free market, the secularism of the age, and the lack of religion following the Bill of Rights and the Enlightenment principles. And tried to enhance the living standard of individuals at the time by giving free health dispensaries, reform prison systems, ameliorating the education conditions, and even establishing redemption houses for women in urban New York for prostitution ill. And we have as well the temperance movement, which was outstanding in the case of the rampant alcoholism, since it became endemic within the American community after the American Revolution, and that happened due to people no longer being able to afford buying other beverages as milk, or the other option would be unsanitary water, so they settled for cheap and affordable alcohol. The benevolent empire tried to fix the situation by the innovation of the American Temperance Society, which organized revivals to quit drinking and lecture campaigns and such across the American states. So the 19th century evangelical mission and reform societies assembled the reform agenda, along with change by abandoning the hierarchical religion and adopting the principle of equality, which led to the foundation of the African American Christianity with the founding of the New York denomination, African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. Well, one of the countless revivalist figures who contributed to the reform cause was Finney, the leader of the Second Great Awakening. He basically promoted the perfectionism movement, and as the name suggests, it was all about reflecting God's perfection in your conduct and dissociating from committing sins and wrongdoings, which end up encouraging a lot of priests to join in. And we have another inciter for attracting individuals to the reform, and that would be the disinterested benevolence, which consisted on prioritizing and putting the society interest over yours. This urged preachers to join in, and under their assistance and that of evangelical ministers, the benevolent empire dealt with distinct social abuse and tried to enhance the living standard of individuals at the time by giving free health dispensaries, reform prison systems, ameliorating the education conditions, and even establishing redemption houses for women in urban New York for prostitution ill. And we have as well the temperance movement, which was outstanding in the case of the rampant alcoholism, since it became endemic within the American community after the American Revolution, and that happened due to people no longer being able to afford buying other beverages as milk, or the other option would be unsanitary water, so they settled for cheap and affordable alcohol. The benevolent empire tried to fix the situation by the innovation of the American Temperance Society, which organized revivals to quit drinking and lecture campaigns and such across the American states. So the 19th century evangelical mission and reform societies assembled the reform agenda, along with change by abandoning the hierarchical religion and adopting the principle of equality, which led to the foundation of the African American Christianity with the founding of the New York denomination, African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. Well, in the early 1800s, churches in the North were trying to adjust to the dynamic alter American society was undergoing with the emergence of the industrialization, urbanization, as well as large waves of immigration coming. And regardless of their divergence in sex, being Baptist, Presbyterian, and the like, they still shared the same Protestant umbrella. Thus, they took it upon themselves to shape the Republic, and they shared the common interest, such as eradicating the moral abuses and make more and easy access to education, which led them to transform their division into cooperative rivalries for the goal of achieving utopian society with reforms as the abolition and temperance movement and establishing the Protestant missionary societies, which we know as the Benevolent Empire, where women contributed efficaciously in this epoch of reform by their key roles in both primary and church schools, and assuring piety in households, attending meetings, formal causes, and so on. Well, this was the case with the North community. However, it was total opposite if you put South and North together and compare. The former did not share the same priorities as the North, and they took a total different approach. While the North focused on reaching this moral perfection, equality, and so on, the South thrived to put their interests high on their list of priorities and favored the constitution of slavery, for example, for it was a part of the Bible scriptures, and they linked it to the religion. As a matter of fact, numerous religious movements made appearance in the United States within the Favorist era of the Second Great Awakening in the 19th century, since this latter pursued and advocated the religious tolerance. So, with no doubt, the religious revivals altered the American society in radical ways that included the church attendance, social and political activity, as well as the inception of new denomination, which fell under the umbrella of Protestantism, as was seen with the Mormonism movement, the Restoration movement, the social gospel movement, and lastly, Unitarianism. Well, we need to bear in mind that some of these religious evolution did not exert as much influence as others did on the corners and crevices of society. If we take, for instance, the Restoration movement, including both that of Stone and Campbell separately, whom both wanted separation from the mainstream Protestantism. So this 19th century movement aimed, unlike other movements, to bring back the idealized original church based solely on the New Testament and abandon all those organized denomination, for they practiced irrelevant and no found from the Bible rules and practices. Well, it ended up failing by division into multiple groups in the next decade, speculatively as a consequence of existent tension and a clash of interest. Whereas if we take another movement, namely social gospel movement, we will see a divergence between this movement and the aforementioned, the Restoration one. So the social gospel movement is a part of the progressive movement, all right? It was brought to light in the 70s of the 19th century by a group of liberal Protestants as a response to the ills of the industrialization and the immigration of the Gilded Age. It is worth mentioning that the Gilded Age was a period characterized by extreme materialism and rampant corruption in the United States. In fact, despite the existence of precedent Christian reform movement, this movement was dissimilar, since they prioritized society salvation over that of the individual alone. All right, they thrived for Christianized, equitable balance of power within the economic and social classes of society. They supported distant causes. Specifically, their focus was on the proletariat class, the working class, in other words. Concern and condition, including the wage, the legislation of the 8 hours workday, the child labor, and so on. So another prominent movement will be Unitarianism. During the antebellum era, Another religious movement called the Unitarian movement was brought to light, rising in the congregational churches of New England. It was pretty prevalent within the elite class, specifically. So it competed with the acceptance and fame evangelical Protestantism received from the masses at the time. It even paralleled the same reaction of welcoming and approval. So furthermore, the movement was pretty distinct from the precedent and other revivals. Its principles were in accordance with reason and logical reasoning, which was expected since its leaders were inspired by the Enlightenment values. However, the latter did not stop them from having this strict idealized belief in the rectitude of human nature. Additionally, they denied the Christian notion of the Trinity as well, but considered Jesus an upright individual and to some extent a divine being, however not a god. And one of those Unitarian leading theologians was Hilary, who played a key role in influencing other churches and spreading Unitarianism by preaching his infamous sermon, Unitarian Christianity. We also have Adventism, or Seventh-day Adventism. It is a pure Protestant revival. In other words, unlike other Protestant sects which share a Catholic core, Adventism is all Protestant. It rose out of the Millerite movement after the occurrence of the Great Disappointment, when the Baptist Miller, former deist, failed in his prediction of Jesus' comeback in 1844. Since then, some of the clergymen who kept their faith together united and created the movement, the Adventism movement, in 1860. Lastly, we have Mormonism, or known as the Latter-day Saint movement, or as the Mormonist movement. It is considered to be the 19th century creed of polygamy, and to be a very particular movement, very distinct from the precedent revivals. It surged during an epoch where both mainstream Christianity and America were still a budding infant. It was founded in 1830 by Joseph Smith in upstate of New York, who considered himself to be a prophet and claimed to have a series of divine revelation. Hence, we have the founding of the true Church of Jesus Christ. It started spreading pretty swiftly to Ohio and Missouri, and eventually across the nation. Well, following his divine visions, Smith established the Holy City, also known as the New Jerusalem City, preparatory for the second coming of Jesus on America's western frontier, the Missouri frontier, where they got subjected to persecutions, mob violence by their neighbors, no Mormons. And one outstanding event would be the Mountain Meadow Massacre. Well, putting that aside, we need to bear in mind that despite Mormons claiming to be Christian, they are not perceived nor acknowledged as such by Christians. They are more considered to be traditional rather than a sect following Christianity, due to their own peculiar set of philosophies and practices. However, it is usually unknown that regardless of the hostility received and rejection, they are recognized by some to be the paragon of the American family values, which offer the safe and conservative version of it.
During the 19th century, religion was a dominant factor in American personal identity, along with politics. Although there were diverse religious backgrounds, Protestantism was the driving, prepotent religion. The Second Great Awakening was a religious revival that lasted over 50 years, involving the revival of the Christian spirit and moral rectification. The movement gave prominence to Methodists and Baptists, leading to a rise in church membership across the U.S. The spiritual resurgence of revivalism significantly altered American culture and character. During this time, church membership skyrocketed and thousands of individuals converted to the distant Protestant sects after the Second Great Awakening. The Southern states were slaveholding and supported the institution of slavery, and preachers delivered sermons of servitude and submission. Religion in the North focused on social and moral reform, including women's rights and the temperance movement. The Unitarian movement believed in both human reason and innate uprightness, was rapidly adopted in the Congregational Church of New England, and spread within the elites. The antebellum period was an age of both social and moral reform leading to the American Civil War. Thank you for watching and listening.